Cool. It's wonderful to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute after the show today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So before we get into your work, I want to know this. 5 years ago, this pandemic was changing everything about our lives. How did you get through that era, and how has it influenced the way that you live and work in 2025?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was really fortunate in many ways because when the pandemic hit, and I was working in the food system for a couple of decades at that point, and we recognized that we actually had to kind of band together to help each other out. I worked with a lot of local farmers and independent food and beverage businesses. And so I founded a nonprofit in March of 2020. So when the pandemic hit, I actually got to work. And I wasn't fortunately, unfortunately, sort of holed up in my sweatpants watching Netflix. I was actually out there building a nonprofit.
Yeah. So there's a lot of titles that go into what you do. You're very busy. But if we wanted to boil that down to something that's digestible and understandable, I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of kids in that school. They're 12 years old. It's career day. You walk in, and the kid in the back of the room is like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer him?
Storyteller.
Okay.
Yeah, writer.
Okay.
Sometimes when I read the audiobook, went back to my preschool teaching days where I would read children's books. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's the best way to learn. My wife's a high school English teacher, and the kids, no matter how much they feel about reading, when it's story time, even at that age, they just totally cling to it.
hmm Yeah. And I think we never really grow out of that, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but I think for me, I it takes me forever to read, but I thank God for audiobooks because I can actually read fast when I go through the audiobooks and it makes sense. Like I can take in information auditorily, like even like a baseball game on the radio, it makes more sense to me, but I know with other people it just sometimes the connection's not there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm the same way. In
Yeah.
fact, I had written a book and then I thought, do I want to do an audiobook? And then I was thinking, okay, this is how I would want to hear the book,
Yeah.
even though it's the sound of my own voice, which can be a little bit challenging sometimes to hear yourself for 9 hours. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I was like, I got to do the audiobook. And people are like, you have to read the audiobook. And that was another piece of it. But I recognized it is my story, so I have to tell it in my words.
So have you always loved reading and writing?
I definitely writing, although I kind of grew out of it. Like I would journal and it was really basic stuff, like, had a hard day, this happened or whatever. Um, and I've enjoyed reading, but I, like you, prefer audiobooks recently. I think it's the challenge of being online, and my attention span is not what it used to be.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so I think I've always really enjoyed the process and a well-crafted book. But I didn't think I was going to actually write a book. That's for sure.
So, what was the first early book for you, or a very seminal read that you had in life that made you either want to read more or write?
Yeah, I think if I on my nightstand still, I have The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. I think that I really enjoy Anne Lamott as well. There's books I read all different. It's kind of like my music selection. I read all different kinds of books, and sometimes I often will find like, geez, I don't want to learn anymore. I just want to read for fun. So I find myself needing to waffle back and forth so I don't uh, get more distracted when I'm reading a book.
So, I'm listening to a book now called The Writer's Library, and they interview like it's probably going to be like 15 authors, and it goes through their life of what they read early on, what book they would love to have released if they had the chance, and just this whole litany of questions, and it's fascinating. Just like there's been two or three people that have mentioned The Giving Tree, as being like the early read, and just it's just fascinating to see how people's journeys end up. Like some of them didn't grow up around books or anything like that, and they figured it
Mhm.
out later on, and now they're prolific writers. It's amazing how these journeys, they're all very unique to finding that oasis of books.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's good to expose ourselves to different types of writers
Yeah,
or genres so that we keep an open mind.
yeah.
We don't get stagnant in just one train of thought or one subject matter.
Yeah, I got to a rendezvous years ago with haiku. Just as
Mhm.
simple as it is, there's something about it that's almost more profound than a regular poem because you just have to pack that whole thing with such profundity in a short space. But I think undulating between, long form and short form, it's a good thing to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting because when I wrote my book, because I had moved so many times in my life, what I was finding is it didn't have flow because I would move, I moved to an island in the South Pacific and then ended up moving back 6 months later. And people were getting lost in like, I can't keep track of all these details. And so I ended up, when I wrote the book, I was like, I'm going to set this up as a short story. So every chapter is a standalone just because otherwise it would confuse the reader. So that was one interesting way I approached it.
I almost think we need to have an app on our phone that's like an organizational chart. Like when you go into a house with a family that you're not familiar with, you can just kind of pull up and be like, "All right, I got it." So that dude, that's his kid. That just like with you with traveling and going to so many places, if you could just have something that came up on the first page, like J.R. Tolkien would always have the maps, and you could just have the org chart. Like this is where from these years to these years.
Yeah, and you know what? Someone actually recommended that in
Yeah.
particular, one of the editors, because they were like, you need an org chart.
Uh-huh.
My mom had been married a number of times. I have siblings from different parents, and I really should have put an org chart in there, but I
Yeah.
just put an author's note instead
Yeah.
in the beginning, like, look, this is gonna, try to keep up.
Yep. That's it. Yeah. My stepdaughter's boyfriend, I went over to one side of his house and there's just all these people running around. I'm like, who is that? Who is that? Okay. All right. But people kept coming in and out. And it's like, if I would have had a visual, it just makes everything. And, as you know, with books, sometimes it's so character heavy. You're just like, wait, who is that again? You're just like, your brain's filtering through all these names,
Hmm.
you know?
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
so speaking of moving around a lot, take me to the beginnings of your life and the seeds that were sown that made you become a writer, that gave you this curiosity that has allowed you to evolve into who you are today. What were the seeds that were planted that evolved into who you are?
Yeah, I think, well, I moved around a lot and a lot of turmoil in my upbringing. My childhood really should have a trigger warning, but I think that it was through survival and watching human nature, to be honest with you, because that adaptability, being aware of my surroundings at all times, really gave me an opportunity to be able to read people and kind of read between the lines in terms of what they were saying verbally and then what they were not saying. There's their nonverbal communication. And so I think through, I was wondering, like, how did my past really train me for my adulthood? And it was just engaging with all different types of people. And because we moved so much, I would go to a new school and just have to try to fit in. And yeah, so it was really kind of interesting how that came back as an adult and through the writing of just being aware not only of others, but myself and what were my shortcomings, what was I working on, what could I do better, just constantly questioning just sort of how I was living my life or maybe what people might need in a moment in a conversation that brought an awareness that helped me really craft this book.
So, along our journey in life, especially if you go through trauma and you go through very trying things, there's always a hero or an inspiration in our personal narratives that helps us get to that place. Did you have someone like that that helped you get to this place in life?
Absolutely. Yes, I did. I was very fortunate in that, yes, I had a lot of heaviness in my childhood and my young adulthood and adulthood for that matter. But I wrote a chapter called The Angels Among Us. And they were the small acts that might often go unnoticed in a storyline that upon reflection, as I was writing these chapters, I was like, that person single-handedly gave me $350 for their last $350 for a Greyhound bus ticket back home. And it really changed my life, potentially saved my life and the trajectory of my life. And so that was a really beautiful act to go back and say, this little thing at the time, I didn't, might not have thought much of it, but changed my whole trajectory. And it was a very grateful act to just go back and reflect upon those stories that people were there for me in small ways that had a big impact.
So I would imagine living through early trauma and overcoming all of that to rehash that by writing about it. When you collectively look at going into this process, did you have any trepidation of doing it? And did it ultimately become a cathartic venture for you to do that?
Absolutely. Yes, to all of the above. I think that initially I was like, why do I want to rehash this? Right. I just spent a year on healing myself and overcoming those stories. As I described in the book, for 47 years, I was encased in the amber of my history, of my trauma. Oftentimes unknowingly, right? Just wandering about my days, but numbing, overworking, all the things. And then I recognized, like, the world is hurting right now. And I think it's time for us to have honest conversations so that we can support one another. In my story in particular, it was the trauma and the after effects of that trauma that kept me stuck in a lot of unhealthy ways or thought patterns. And so I decided that I was going to write this book and be really honest about my journey, and that was tough. Like the day that I actually was going to put the book out on my personal social media, I struggled with that. It took me a week to hit the post button because I was nervous, like what will people think? And people that I'd been friends with for 30 years, when they read the book, were like, I had no idea, no idea. And so I was really good at hiding it, and all of a sudden it was like going to come forward. But what I recognized with just publishing the book, reading the audiobook, which I was hesitant to do as well, it was like this was all the final. It's almost as if when I wrote it down, it was released. When I spoke it, it came out of my muscles and tissues. It was the finality sort of the healing process that I didn't recognize until after the book was out. And also the reception. It's been really beautiful to just have people come up and hug me that have read it or call me and track down my number and just be like, "Oh my gosh, this chapter." And we just cry together. And I think that at this time in our world, those moments are needed more now than ever.
Absolutely, they are. So, as someone that loves writing and loves words, if you could go back in time and watch an author construct the way that they write a book, and to see that creative process, is there an author that you're fascinated with that you would love to go and just be a fly on the wall and see how they did it?
Well, I think that yes, there are for sure. Like I really appreciated, I felt in some ways that Elizabeth Gilbert, Eat, Pray, Love, because I was on my own journey and that's what I was stepping out into the big unknown. And I think that watching that process and seeing how people unfold, and then ultimately you understand that each person has their thing, their way that actually helps them, and sort of intuitively lean into what actually works for me when I'm doing this writing process, and thinking through that as well. So I think that it's really cool to see. It's just for me in particular, the memoir is observing myself and human nature as we engage with the world and try to figure out what it all means.
So, as you said to that group of kids that you're a storyteller, who is one of your favorite storytellers? For the voice, the meter, the depth of what they bring, do you have a favorite storyteller?
Well, it's interesting because I oftentimes listen to podcasts now, and I'm really interested in people's stories. I tend to lean a little bit on Tim Ferriss and his podcast because I think he does a great job interviewing all sorts of people. Um, with that being said, I think that it's great when you hear everyday people, maybe not necessarily famous people that are really well known, but I think the podcast for me, Anne Lamont, Elizabeth Gilbert, there's one that's escaping me now. He's a famous artist that I think that for me in particular, there's not necessarily one person, it's humanity itself, right? What's people's stories? What's going on behind closed doors? And how are they navigating that? Because I think there's threads in everything. So for me, my some of my most impactful storytelling experiences have been not just turning to my book or a phone on an airplane and listening and hearing the person next to me in the seat next to mine, or an elementary school janitor who had wisdom to share. So I think that it's sort of all of the above.
Yeah. So, what is the motivation for you every day to wake up, to be a storyteller, to do this work with the nonprofit, to be who you are, to deliver a quality product, but to also evolve as a human being? What is that energy for you every day?
Yeah, sometimes it's great, right? I wake up with gratitude in my heart, like clutching my chest, like, thank goodness I made it another day. This is so cool. But I also made it to the other side, right? I'm 50 now. And so I think that it was a process to get to this moment that I even felt like motivated, where it wasn't just like, how am I going to do a great job, in my work? How am I, going to crush it as a parent? All the things. Now it's more of a slowness, a realization that we're all really trying to do the best we can. And it's through, for me, my jam, the thing that gets me going is building community. That's what I've done for a couple decades in my work, and it definitely bleeds over into my personal life. And now, I've started my own personal business. Unfortunately, left the nonprofit world behind because, we have to tap out at some point when we're executive directors because it's tough work. And then just writing. So I think that how I feel right now in this moment motivated to help heal in whatever capacity that looks like, and just be there and show up and do the work for myself and help others in the process. And so that's actually what gets me motivated right now.
So, if you could go back in a time machine or have a dream tonight and run into a younger version of you, 18 years old, and you could give that version of you a piece of advice based on this life you've lived, the wisdom you've accumulated after all of the choices and avenues you've been down, what advice would you impart on that young version of you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's oftentimes easy to say, do something differently, but I think that I arrived in this moment in time with gratitude because it arrived just when I needed it most, and I showed up just at the perfect time. I don't question that, but I think just know that it's going to be okay, that
Yeah.
you will be okay, that you will make it through to the other side.
So, of everything that you've done and accomplished and evolved to at this point, what are you ultimately the proudest of?
Um, being a survivor, I think that it takes a lot of grit and toughness. And my childhood was, my mom raised me with, you buck up, you just keep going, you don't look back, you just do. And it was a limiting belief system for many years because it got me emotionally bankrupt, where I was just a doer. And but at the same time, that buck up also gave me strength to sort of also find my way back out. So it was useful in a different way when I actually knew the right way to use it. And so, yeah, I think just I'm proud that I have done the tough work, that I just didn't sit on the sidelines and comment on other people's performances, that I actually was in the arena and dragged through the arena, and then ultimately came out victorious. And that could just be like a day, right? It's not like I won the whole game of life because really, who does that, right? But
Yeah.
anyway, it's like, yeah, I did the hard work. I showed up, and that in itself was a triumphant act.
So when you set out to write a book, a lot of people dream of doing that. Getting a book published is a big deal. But you have this dream going into it of what it's going to be like. I'm going to write this book, it's going to publish, and you hope that you touch people and you get great reviews. But then there's the reality of what the process is like, promoting, going through it, all of the things that we've talked about. What's been the difference between the dream of writing this book and being an author, a published author, and what it's actually turned into right now? What's that space in between?
Yeah, I think that honestly, because I felt like how I did approach the year of healing, that really saved my life. And wanted to actually share that story, one of hope and transformation and truth, hard truth. But it is a lot of work to write a book. And I opted to self publish just because I really wanted to put it out there in the world. And I wasn't scared of the amount of work that I knew that it would take because it is a lot of work. You put out the book, and then whether or not you're with a publisher or you self publish, you still have to market, you still have to have conversations about it. And I think that at the time I was just in the process of writing, where I would hole up for a month and get a number of chapters done, and then kind of emerge, and my husband would be like, do you want to go out to dinner? Like, nice to see you.
Yeah.
But I also think that I made it a family project, so my kids and my husband were definitely gave feedback for the writing. And then also I didn't think about like what would happen after. And it was uh, that's the coolest part, because then you have conversations around the subject and the topic, and you get to connect with people in a totally different way. And although initially it was a little uncomfortable for me to talk about myself, like even on a podcast, and then you're like, well, with me opening up and having this kind of conversation with someone, it allows them to know that they have reached a safe harbor and that they can also share their stories. So that's been the coolest part about it, to be honest.
So bouncing around all those years growing up to all these different places on the planet, what was one of your favorite places?
Um, I think Saipan. It's in the middle of the South Pacific, next to Guam, and it was just so different, right? I'd lived in Las Vegas and all over Oregon and now Idaho, and it was just such a different type of adventure where there was a slowness. They talk about island time, and they didn't care at the time about what was happening outside of that small little island. And it's such a unique experience, especially with what's happening now, where we're sort of inundated by news. It was just like, you
Yeah,
just, let's go to dinner or we'll barbecue, play games, go in the water. It's a simpler form of life that just seems non-existent right now, that I
yeah,
hearken back to when I need to just chill out.
yeah. So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you. Family, friends, everyone that gets your book, everyone that knows you in a professional sense, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Hmm, that's a really good question. Um, I would like to say that I am a humble and kind human being that really cares about my impact in the world, and strives to make an impact in the world. And so that's my motivation. But I think just really being a team player and recognizing that we all have faults, and that's part of being human, and we can't judge each other too harshly, because when we judge others, in turn, oftentimes we're our own harshest critic. And so I think just really supporting each other during this time, being aware of what is happening with, that which sustains us, which is Earth,
Yeah,
right? And just, my husband says he wants to come back and be one of our dogs in his next life.
that's
So,
a good idea.
yeah.
I have it figured out. So as someone that loves writing, that loves storytelling, adventurous, you've been many places around the planet. If you could get into a time machine when this call is done and you could go anywhere in the history of time and witness one event with your own eyes, it won't create a tear in time, nothing weird. You would literally be able to witness one thing that happened in our collective human history. What would you love to have seen with your own eyes?
The birth of humanity, where it all started, because I think that holds a lot of the answers where we currently find ourselves. I think just going back to where it all began, so we can remind ourselves what is important during this time.
Yeah,
Because I think we have lost ourselves along the way, and that what we deem to be important in the whole scheme of things on our brief time on this planet is not as important as what we give value to in our day, right? What do we give our time and attention to?
for sure. So, if anybody wants to get a copy of When the Universe Holds Your Hair Back, or if they want to reach out, or if they want to see any other things that you're doing, where can they go?
Uh, so my book is on Amazon, and the audiobook, it's called When the Universe Holds Your Hair Back. I have a website too. It's called Peace, Peace, peaceandfirehealing.com.
Okay. I will put those links in the show notes. Katie, this has been great. Thank you for your story. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been wonderful.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity and great questions. Thank
Thank
you.
you.